hadn't planned on staying late that night. I told myself I'd just drop off the documents, maybe say a quick hello, then head back to my car before the cold could settle into my coat. But that's the thing about plans, sometimes they're just polite lies we tell ourselves. He opened the door like he'd been waiting, like he knew I'd show up even if I didn't. There was something about the way he looked at me. Not just with his eyes but with all of him, stillness, warmth, that quiet kind of attention most people forgot how to give. I stepped inside. His apartment smelled like fresh coffee and cedarwood. A record played low in the background, jazz, slow and smoky, and I felt the knot in my chest start to loosen before I even took off my scarf. "It's late," I said, my voice too soft, too uncertain. He just smiled, easy and slow. "But you came." I don't know what made me stay. Maybe it was the way he handed me a mug, fingers brushing mine just a second longer than they should have. Maybe it was the silence, comfortable, undemanding, as if he was giving me space without stepping away. Or maybe it was the way he saw me, not as a wife, not as a mother, not as someone who spent the last 7 years learning how to disappear in plain sight. He saw me, and God help me, I wanted to be seen. I sat on his couch, wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, and let the night press its weight against the windows. The city outside was hushed and glowing. Inside, the only light came from the kitchen and a flickering candle on the table between us. He didn't ask about my marriage. He didn't have to. Think he knew. Maybe from the way I kept touching my ring like it might vanish. Maybe from the way I flinched every time my phone lit up. He just watched me. Quiet. Patient. And when he finally spoke, it was so soft I almost missed it. "You look like you haven't let yourself breathe in years." I looked at him then, and something inside me cracked. I looked away when he said it, like the truth might burn if I met his eyes too long. He didn't press. He just sat across from me, his thumb tracing the rim of his coffee cup, waiting for me to let the silence do its work. And it did. It filled the room like fog, soft and thick, pulling things out of me I hadn't planned to say. "My husband hasn't touched me in 8 months, I said. Just like that. No preamble. No apology. The words fell out like they'd been waiting in my throat for a year. He didn't flinch. Didn't react. Just looked at me like he understood what I meant, not just what I said. "I don't think he sees me anymore," I added, quieter now. "Not really. I'm just background noise in a life we both pretend still feels right." His voice was barely above a whisper. "And you?" "I stopped feeling like a woman a long time ago," I said. "Now I'm just someone who folds the laundry and asks if he's eaten." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My fingers curled tighter around the mug, searching for something solid in all the unraveling. He got up then, slow and unhurried, and moved to sit beside me, not close enough to touch but closer than he had been. "I don't want to break anything," he said softly, "but if something's already broken, maybe you just need someone to help you feel real again." My chest tightened. The heat between us wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It pulsed, low and steady like the bass line of the song still playing behind us. I didn't answer right away. Couldn't. My heart was thudding too loud in my ears. I just looked at him. His jaw, the gentle crease in his brow, the way his lips parted slightly like he was afraid of saying too much. He reached out slow enough that I could have moved, could have stopped this, but I didn't. His fingers brushed mine barely, a whisper of contact, and somehow it was the first time I'd felt touched in years. I could have pulled away. I told myself that a dozen times in the span of a breath, that this wasn't right. That I was married. That I had a home with photos on the fridge and promises made over dinner tables now covered in dust. But my hand stayed right there beneath his. And when his fingers gently wrapped around mine, I didn't think about consequences. I thought about how warm his skin was. How slow, how deliberate his touch felt. Like he wasn't trying to take anything from me. Just offer something back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everything he was trying to say came through the stillness between us. The way his thumb moved slowly across the back of my hand. The way his gaze kept dipping to my lips, then pulling back like he was fighting something too. I turned toward him, and in that moment, so quiet, so small, I felt something dangerous rise in me. Longing. Not just to be kissed or wanted or undressed, but to be held. Really held. Like I mattered. Like someone wanted to memorize the way my body curved beneath their hands. Like someone saw me not as a wife or a role or a fading memory, but as a woman still capable of stirring something in another human being. My breath caught as he reached up, one hand grazing the side of my face, fingers brushing hair from my cheek like it was something sacred. I didn't move, because part of me was afraid that if I did, the spell would break. He leaned in but stopped just before our lips touched. Just there. Hovering. Like the moment itself was more important than the kiss. Like he wanted to make sure I chose this. I don't want to hurt you, he whispered, his breath touching my skin like a secret. I closed the space between us, not with my lips, but with my forehead resting lightly against his. I've already been hurt, I said. I just want to feel something true. And he kissed me. Soft. Barely there. The kind of kiss that doesn't steal your breath but gives it back to you. Like warmth after a long winter. Like light after too much dark. That kiss should have been the line. The final exhale before I pulled away and reminded myself who I was, what I had to go home to. But I didn't move. And neither did he. His lips lingered against mine like a question. A soft, trembling pause waiting for an answer I wasn't strong enough to give. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. My hands, almost on their own, slid up his chest, slow, uncertain. Feeling the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't mine, but suddenly felt like it could be. He was solid beneath my palms. Warm. Real. Not a fantasy, not a memory, but something present. Alive. And when he pulled me into his arms, I let myself melt. Not because I didn't know it was wrong, but because it was the first time in years I felt like I belonged somewhere. There was no rush. No fumbling urgency. Just breath and silence and the sound of rain starting to tap against the window, like the sky itself was holding its breath with us. He didn't grope or grab. He held me. One arm wrapped around my back, the other gently resting at the curve of my waist. Fingers splayed wide like he wanted to cover every inch of loneliness that had settled into my skin. I didn't realize I was crying until he pressed his forehead to mine again and whispered, "You don't have to apologize for needing this." My body trembled. Not from fear. From relief. Because there was no expectation in his touch. No demand. Just space finally to feel again. He brushed his lips along my jaw, barely a breath against my skin, and my eyes fluttered closed. Every part of me lit up like a match had been struck deep inside my chest. I forgot what it's like. I whispered. "What?" he asked gently. "To be touched like I matter." He tightened his hold just slightly. And in that space between regret and need, something in me cracked open. I don't know how long we stayed like that, wrapped in silence and closeness, in the kind of touch that said everything words couldn't. Time lost shape. My body, once so tightly coiled in routine and restraint, began to remember itself. Not just as a thing that cooked dinners and carried burdens, but as something desirable, as something worthy of warmth, of tenderness, of being wanted, not out of duty but out of hunger. He shifted slightly, and his lips found the curve of my shoulder, through the soft fabric of my sweater, but it was enough to send a shiver racing down my spine. My breath caught, and his hand moved to the small of my back, drawing slow, grounding circles there. Like he was mapping a landscape no one had explored in years. My instincts told me to stop, to pull away, to explain myself, to put on the armor I wore at home, the one made of lists and laundry and silence at the dinner table. But I didn't, because the way he touched me, it wasn't reckless. It was intentional, reverent almost, like I was something fragile and precious, not forgotten and fading. I tilted my head, letting his mouth trail down to the edge of my neck, each breath of his like a quiet confession against my skin. "Is this okay?" he murmured. His voice broke something soft inside me. I nodded because words felt too heavy in my throat. And when our mouths met again, this time deeper, fuller, it wasn't just a kiss. It was surrender. I felt it everywhere. In the way his fingers slid up beneath the hem of my sweater. Just barely, just enough to make my skin ache. In the heat that pulsed between us, slow and unbearable. In the tremble of my hands as I touched his face, tracing the outline like I was memorizing it for the last time. I wasn't thinking about my husband, or what would happen tomorrow. I was thinking about the way this man breathed when he kissed me. About the way he held me like I was something he'd waited a lifetime to find. about how, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. There was no roadmap for what happened next. No script. No careful choreography. Just instinct and tension and the quiet thunder of two people who had been holding back for far too long. His touch deepened but never rushed. Every movement was a question, and every answer was given through breath, through the press of skin, through the way my body leaned into his like it had been waiting to be asked. The air between us changed, thicker, warmer. The flickering candle on the table cast our shadows onto the wall behind the couch, and in that soft golden light, everything felt softer, forgivable, even the shame. He guided me gently, wordlessly, until I was beneath him, his body hovering, his hands framing my face like I was something he didn't dare drop. I remember his eyes most. Not hungry, not possessive, but tender, like he was watching something sacred unfold. Every kiss, every graze of his hand, every trembling pause felt like it carried more than desire. It carried recognition, like we were speaking a language we didn't know we knew, one that had nothing to do with words and everything to do with need. My sweater slipped up, and he hesitated again, eyes searching mine. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. I didn't. I couldn't. Because I wanted this, not out of revenge, not out of recklessness, but because my body was aching for it. For him. For this moment that made the rest of the world blur until all I could feel was the warmth of his skin, and the weight of his breath against my collarbone. We moved slowly, as if time itself had softened around us. There was no rush, no urgency to arrive anywhere. Just the rhythm we didn't speak of, the one our hearts found on their own. And in the stillness between gasps and glances, something inside me unfolded. Not lust, not even love, but a remembering of the woman I used to be before life quieted her down. The quiet that came after wasn't empty. It was thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we just confessed without a single word. He lay beside me, not touching now, just near. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him in the space between our shoulders. Close enough that I didn't feel alone. But far enough that I could hear the pounding of my own guilt louder than my heartbeat. Reality doesn't crash in all at once. Seeps in. Through the ticking of the clock on his wall. Through the way my phone buzzed twice face down on the table. Through the faint imprint of my wedding ring still warm on the nightstand, where I'd slipped it off without thinking. He turned his head toward me. I didn't have to look to feel it. "I'm not asking for anything," he said gently. "Not a promise. Not a future. He paused. "I just wanted to remind you what it felt like." I nodded, staring at the ceiling like it held some kind of answer. "It felt like I was alive," I whispered. And it did. More than I wanted to admit. More than I was ready to deal with. I sat up slowly, gathering my sweater, smoothing the hem like that could somehow smooth over what had happened between us. My hands trembled. He didn't stop me. He didn't beg or plead or ask me to stay. He just watched me with the kind of softness that made it harder to leave. "You don't have to run," he said. "Not from me." I looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd held me like I was something worth knowing. Who hadn't taken, only given. And maybe that's what broke me most. Because I couldn't hate him. And I couldn't stay. So I nodded, pulling my scarf around my shoulders, the scent of him still clinging to my skin like memory. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "Whatever happens after this, I hope you never forget how it felt to be seen." I didn't look back. But those words followed me all the way home. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because of what I was carrying. His touch was still on my skin. His breath still tucked into the curve of my neck. The memory of his voice, low, steady, certain, echoed in my chest louder than the wind outside the car. I pulled into the driveway like a thief. The porch light was on. My husband had left it for me like always. Out of habit. Out of care maybe. But not out of love. Not the kind that sees you, that reaches for you even in silence. Inside, everything was still. Our house always had this strange, aching quiet to it, like it was remembering the noise it used to hold. I stood in the hallway longer than I should have. Coat still on. Shoes still wet. Then I went to the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and stared at myself in the mirror. My reflection didn't look different. But I felt different. There was color in my cheeks. My lips were still parted. as if they hadn't finished speaking the things I'd never said. My eyes looked awake. And yet, the guilt settled in my stomach like a stone. I had done something I couldn't undo. But underneath the shame, underneath the fear and the ache and the swirl of everything I couldn't name, there was something else. Gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the moment I let myself feel. For the man who didn't try to save me, but simply held me in the space between who I used to be and who I still might become. I climbed into bed beside a man who barely stirred, who mumbled something soft and meaningless before turning over. And I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling again. But this time it didn't have answers. Only questions. Was it wrong to want more? Was it worse to forget what it felt like? I don't know what happens next. I'm not proud of what I did. But I remember how it felt to be seen. And some nights, when the silence in this house gets too loud, I close my eyes and return to that room where a man who wasn't mine reminded me, I still exist.